Well, it's just circling. What's up, everybody? This is Charlie Potter, senior team writer of BamaOnLine.com, and we're here at LSU week, folks. It's a big one down in Baton Rouge for Alabama. But before we get to that, some big news from a college football standpoint with the first CFP rankings coming out earlier this week. We wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit. We know there's still a lot of football to be played, a lot more of these ranking shows to come out, but the first iteration, Alabama's in right now. If there was a playoff played this weekend, they came in at number 11. They would play at Texas, a first-round playoff game on the college campus, which I think would be really exciting. And I think that's something to look forward to in December. But, Jimmy, what was your reaction to that first set of playoff rankings, whether it be where Alabama showed up or otherwise?
Yeah, as y'all could probably tell from my lunatic rantings on the board, I've been, harping on strength of schedule. I think needs to be a bigger factor with the committee. I was, happy for Alabama about making it in last year, but it's bothered me for the entire offseason that the final college football playoff rankings last year was simply 1 through 25, a list based solely on loss column. There was only one real exception in the whole top 25, and that was Alabama and Texas above Florida State. Other than that, it was all the 0-loss teams, then all the 1-loss teams, then all the 2-loss teams, then all the 3-loss teams. And I think that's outrageous. We could just get some kindergartners and feed them some Sprite and McNuggets, and they could line them up by loss column. If we're going to have some real experts there, they need to do a deeper dive. And that means ranking a 2-loss team ahead of a 1-loss team, or even an undefeated team, or a 3-loss team ahead of a 2-loss team. And it's not really that controversial to me. But anyway, it stood out to me that they were very inconsistent with strength of schedule. They did factor it in to a degree, like, for instance, benefiting Alabama. Alabama was the highest 2-loss team, and they do have played the toughest schedule amongst the 2-loss teams. So I think Alabama was kind of correctly ranked. I would also argue that Alabama should not be behind Notre Dame, who's played the 71st schedule. Alabama's played the 11th, and their loss is worse than Alabama's worst loss. So Alabama should be ahead of Notre Dame. But overall, even though I have a low opinion of the committee, I think Alabama is fairly ranked at 11.
Yeah, it's the same as the AP and the coaches poll. It's very similar, actually, when you look at the whole, kind of body of work. And again, it'll change. It can change drastically as early as next week because there's some big matchups, including the one down in Baton Rouge we're going to talk about in a little bit. But, Blake, when you watched the rankings, did anything stand out to you? Did you feel Alabama was correctly rated in these first initial rankings?
I did. I think Alabama's fair in the 10 to 12 range, considering that they do have 2 losses. But like you said, Jimmy, they have played one of the toughest schedules in the country. I thought it was kind of interesting that the rankings on Tuesday lined up with the AP and the coaches poll as well as they did, because I feel like a lot of times you see these first playoff rankings and they're pretty different. Like, they don't just kind of go 1 through 10, 1 through 15 down the line and look as similar as they did. So I think that was interesting, just that the committee and the AP kind of have the same line of thinking at this point in the year. I'm sure they will look different as the season goes on. I know one difference was that Georgia was down at 3 rather than 2, which is something I personally disagree with. But, I mean, there are a couple tweaks here and there you could make, but I thought kind of generally it seemed fine where everyone was. I didn't see anything that really felt egregious or anything that was terrible. I would also rank Alabama over Notre Dame because of the loss being to Northern Illinois in the schedule. I think it's interesting what they end up doing with Indiana, because that team has the 103rd ranked schedule right now. But, they have to play Ohio State in a couple weeks, so that will sort itself out. I feel like there's a lot of football left to be played. And we kind of saw that. Props to ESPN, I will say. I thought they did a really good job of their explanation of the format in the way that they presented their graphics. I feel like they made it pretty decently easy to understand for a casual viewer. So I was interested to see kind of how they presented it, because I know it is so complicated, and so they have to do a good job presenting that information. So I thought they did decent there, and nothing crazy as far as surprises or anything like that for me.
Nothing too crazy. I'm with you though, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on it too, Jimmy, because you've been feisty on the subject, and I think it's good for YouTube. Just what they did at the top, because obviously Oregon was going to be number one. You could have penciled that in before the show started, but to have Ohio State over Georgia, I think it says a lot because one, Ohio State lost to Oregon. That's not a bad loss by any stretch of the imagination. But I think they kind of discredited Georgia because their losses to Alabama. So I think it's topical, but I think more so than that, it was a little shocking.
Yeah, I would have Georgia number 2, and to me, it's almost as simple. I was just saying a kindergartner could do it. The way that the committee's been doing it. A kindergartner could also look at it this way, but I think Georgia should be the highest ranked one-loss team because they've played the hardest schedule. In fact, Georgia's played the number 1 toughest schedule in the entire country. How that's not a huge factor is beyond me. That's why they should have been number 2. They've played the toughest schedule period, and they should definitely be the highest one-loss team, and they weren't, which again shows the committee doesn't really. I think the committee put Ohio State 2 almost like an AP pollster would, in the sense that Georgia didn't play well this past Saturday against Florida, and Ohio State beat Penn State. But that's not what this committee is supposed to be about. This committee is supposed to look at the entire body of work, not what they did 48 hours ago. And I just feel like it was just very inconsistent all the way through. Like Blake says, true, nothing's egregious. It's not egregious that Indiana is number 8. They've had a great season. They deserve a lot of recognition for what they've done. But I thought the committee's job, much like the basketball committee, is supposed to make sense of a disorderly situation with everybody playing a disparate schedule. And they're supposed to, I thought, deep dive analytics, look at the metrics, look at strength of schedule, strength of record. It looks to me like it's just an AP poll. And again, with the primary factor being your one-loss record.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we'll see how it plays out the rest of the year, how much they start to maybe take into consideration strength of schedule. But if you're Greg Byrne, you might have to rethink your scheduling plan for the future, just in terms of these non-conference games. And of course, we'll see what happens with an SEC scheduling standpoint. But we'll try to bring your blood pressure down a little bit, Jimmy, for the rest of the show.
Hey, my age, I like being upset. I feel something.
That's good. That's good. Well, hey, it might stay up. We never know. This is a matchup that's important because to stay in this playoff hunt, Alabama has to keep winning, and that starts this week. I mean, it's a must-win game for Alabama, and that's what we're going to kind of shift gears to now is this matchup with LSU. And we're going to kind of start just from a health standpoint, a check-in on these two teams, because Alabama's pretty healthy going into this. When we have some news from Monday we'll get to in a little bit, but I wanted to start with the Tigers, and I'll start with you, Jimmy. Just, we know that offensive line, which is a damn good offensive line in terms of what they've been able to do this season and keeping Garrett Nussmeier upright, they're without a key starter in this game, which I think could be impactful.
Yes, and this is when healthy, when they had all 5 of their guys and their 6th offensive lineman. I think it's a Joe Moore Award worthy offensive line, certainly a major contender. Just, it's a dude palooza up there. Both tackles are top 10 picks. Both guards are going to be high picks for guards in the NFL draft one day. The center is the only new starter, and he's probably the biggest center in the league at 6'6", kid from Buford. This is a fantastic offensive line from a pass protection standpoint. Garrett Nussmeier has one of the cleanest pockets in the league week after week after week. Now, run blocking has been sort of an issue with them. They don't run the ball well, and it's kind of, I get to ask why. I'm like, I don't know. You're going to have to ask Chris Kapelovic or something. I mean, I can't explain why LSU can't run the ball behind that offensive line. The line is great, but they do have 2 injuries, actually, that are of huge significance to them. The left guard, Dillinger, he's had the tightrope surgery, so he's out. And that's big. It's the equivalent. Imagine if Jaden Roberts was healthy and Alabama suddenly lost him. I think that's the equivalent. So Alabama fans can understand how that would be a big deal. But Alabama fans might say, well, Geno Vandermark's done okay subbing in for Jaden. Well, LSU's also lost their 6th offensive lineman, Adams. He's out. So it would be like Alabama losing Jaden Roberts and Geno Vandermark. So now you're going out there probably an Alabama situation with either Olas or Rott Montgomery. And I would imagine LSU's got a somewhat similar offensive line situation. So yeah, I think it's a big deal considering this is a major strength of the team. It only takes, guys, the offensive line it's a different bird than everything else on a football. It's the literal team within a team. And an offensive line is only as good as its weakest link. It doesn't matter that the 2 tackles are top 10 picks if there's a constant leak at a guard position. It doesn't matter that the tackles are good. All 5 guys have to be good for an offensive line to be good. So hopefully this is something Alabama can take advantage of.
Yeah, I wrote down Dude Palooza. I'm going to use that at some point here moving forward. It might be even in the headline or the video or the title video for this. So we'll see. I like that a lot.
The name of a questionable bar. Maybe.
Yeah, you could use it for a lot of things, I'm guessing. But Blake, what about from Alabama's standpoint? I think they're relatively healthy. We obviously know Keon Sabb's out for a while, and we saw Bray Hubbard come in. But what's the latest from Alabama from a health standpoint?
Yeah, we found out this week that Alabama lost or will lose Cole Adams for the rest of the year. And so that is a ding to Alabama's wide receiver room. And he's a guy who's gotten a lot more reps with the ones, more so than he did at the start of the season. I think he even started the game, the first snap against South Carolina. And I'm not sure if he started against Tennessee or Missouri, but he's played significant snaps there and been kind of a reliable guy. He doesn't have crazy stats or anything, but that is a guy that you're going to miss, and a guy who has played his role well. You're also going to miss him as the starting punt returner, and he's been kind of the guy who's had the most sure hands back there. And I feel like you have less fans holding their breath on punt returns when it's Cole Adams back there versus some of these other guys. But now you're going to have to turn on the punt returning front to Kalen DeBoer mentioned Jalen Mbakwe and Ryan Williams as the 2 guys who have gotten reps there this season. I feel like we'll see Mbakwe there most because he's kind of been the second punt return guy behind Cole Adams, and Cole has dealt with injuries even before this one that knocked him out for the year. So we've seen Mbakwe back there, and he's got some explosiveness to him. We know how good of an athlete Ryan Williams is, but I feel like a lot of fans don't like seeing star offensive players like that on punt returns unless it's like Jalen Waddle or something. So I think we'll see mostly Mbakwe there. We'll see if they put Ryan Williams in. On the receiver side, it'll be interesting because Cole Adams isn't technically one of their top 3 that they usually roll out there with Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, and Kendrick Law. But they like to shuffle receivers a lot and get a lot of guys in there with how they like to play fast-paced on offense. You want to have subs ready to go. I bet we'll see a little bit more Kobe Prentice, but he's kind of been up and down as far as production and performance goes. I bet we might see a little more Caleb Odom. Jamarcus Shepard talked about Odom today, and he said that his growth has been exponential over the course of the season. He talked about how proud he was of him and how he'd grown. So maybe some more Caleb Odom, maybe even a little bit of Rico Scott or another young freshman. We'll see. But Shepard talked about how their unit, you stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And they've got talented guys who are now going to get a little bit more of a chance with Adams out. Obviously, the bulk of the targets are going to go to Williams and Bernard and Law and guys like that. But you still have depth that you can put in place and new guys that can step up with Adams out.
I think the wide receiver depth is interesting to me because we do see Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams on the field a lot. They don't really come off that much. But, beyond that, I think you made a good point with Kobe Prentice because in the slide, that just kind of makes too much sense that we would see more of number 6 out there. But I think from a punt return standpoint, it's going to be interesting because I think Jalen Mbakwe makes the most sense as who we'll probably see first. But he kind of had the bobble play against Missouri. And then after that, we kind of saw Ryan Williams the rest of the way. And, to that point, you don't really want your star receiver back there because you don't want something to happen. How we saw Devontae Smith do that, his Heisman winning campaign in 2020. So you never know. But before we move on, Jimmy, just what do you think of that from a punt return standpoint? Because it's going to be a challenge for these guys doing this on the road in Baton Rouge if they're 2 true freshmen that are going to be called upon to do it.
That's exactly right. I mean, there's things that make the coaches nervous. And so it's fair if the coaches are nervous for the fans to be nervous too and not be nervous about this. I mean, freshmen returning punts in one of the most difficult environments in all of college football with the season on the line. I mean, one of my favorite sayings about sports guys is, there's a 3-foot putt and there's a 3-foot putt to win the Masters. Those are 2 entirely different things. Those are two different universes. It's the same shot. It's the same mechanics, but it's 2 different things. And returning a punt in Tiger Stadium with the season on the line is a 3-foot putt to win the Masters. It's not just returning punts. So a lot of pressure on those guys. I would hope I'm super conservative, which comes with being 100 years old. But I would tell if I'm Jay Nunez, I mean, I'm cool with some fair catches Saturday, because the big play is fun, and Bach and Ryan are very capable of making a big play. And who knows, maybe it's a special teams play that decides the game. But when I say a special teams play could decide the game, that's also a fumbled punt return. So I'm cool with fair catches Saturday, but I can be quite conservative.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen what can happen in that moment. I know it was kind of on the flip side where it was the home team, but look at the Iron Bowl last year. Late, a punt return was key in that one. So, yeah, that'll be something to watch. And I don't know if it necessarily I mean, it could be. Yeah, you guys could surprise me. But when looking at kind of the key matchups for this game, I don't know if that makes my list. I think for me, it kind of starts with Alabama's offensive tackles against this LSU pass rush, because the Tigers are pretty good at getting after the quarterback. I think they're 4th in the SEC with 28 sacks. When you look at just opponents that Alabama's faced, the only team that's been better is South Carolina, and South Carolina has a great defensive front. They just have a few more than LSU. So they've been able to get after the quarterback. But kind of on the flip side, what you were talking about earlier, Jimmy, with the LSU offensive line, that LSU defensive front hasn't been as good at stopping the run. I think they're 11th in the SEC. So if those tackles, if Caden Proctor and Elijah Pritchett can keep Jalen Milroe in that pocket clean, then I think Alabama can have some success, because the run game is there. We're going to talk about it in a little bit, but the quarterback run game is also there. But it's a situation where if LSU has success, if they're able to get back to Milroe, disrupt him, maybe force him into a bad throw, then it's going to be an interesting game and maybe a long one for this Alabama offense. So from a key matchup standpoint, when you look at this game on Saturday, I think if Proctor and Pritchett if they go out and they grade highly, big news for Alabama, just in terms of what that could mean for the scoreboard. But if not, this one could be a long game for this offense. But what about you, Blake? What do you think from a key matchup standpoint sticks out to you the most?
There's a couple different ways you could go. I'm looking at the way these Alabama DBs play against LSU's wide receivers. And just they've got weapons out there. Kyron Lacey, former Alabama receiver Aaron Anderson, to name a couple of them, and they're explosive and they can make plays. LSU's quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier, is an aggressive quarterback, and he's a guy who, while he can make a ton of plays, he has thrown a number of interceptions. He's thrown 9 this season. So he's going to try to make plays, even if it comes at the cost of risking a turnover. So my question then becomes, can these Alabama DBs make the plays whenever they come? Like, there are going to be interceptions that can be had, but do they make the plays? And are they able to cover well enough downfield to force Nussmeier into some of those mistakes? And I think if they can, they're going to have a great chance, because you want to force turnovers on the road. And this defense has been pretty dang good at forcing takeaways over the past couple of games. They have 10 over the last 3 games, and a lot of those have been interceptions. And Malachi Moore specifically has, I think, 1 in the last 2 games. So if this team, if this secondary, safeties, corners, if they're able to cover well, not have any busts like we've seen a couple of times this season, like if there's a bust on the back end, Garrett Nussmeier is going to hit it, and there's not going to be an overthrow. I don't expect that out of a quarterback like Nussmeier. So they've got to cover well. They've got to be sound fundamentally, and if they can force Nussmeier into some mistakes with that coverage, then they're going to be in a good spot.
Yeah, you can't have the plays that we saw at Tennessee, the open plays, because where Nico Iamaleava didn't hit those, you're right, Garrett Nussmeier can. And I think it's worth mentioning, too, he had 3 picks in the last game, so he can be had. I think that's the point for this Alabama defense, and the opportunistic approach they've had of late fits into that as well. But what about you, Jimmy? Is it something we've mentioned, or is there something else that stands out to you from a matchup standpoint?
No, both of those matchups that y'all bring are definitely key. Mine's, one more that I think is really big has to do with LSU's offensive line. I'm going to call it Kane Womack versus Garrett Nussmeier. And by that, LSU's tackles are just outstanding. Will Campbell and Emory Jones, these are projected top 10 picks, not just first-round picks, projected top 10 picks in the NFL draft. Alabama, most of this season, has just sort of rushed the quarterback with four guys, and Garrett Nussmeier threw the ball 50 times against A&M. So this is a high volume pass rush situation. And Alabama's rush four, the front four, has been most of the pass rush. Well, you know, you have LT Overton and maybe Q Robinson outside. They've been your best pass rushers, right? They could be matched up with Campbell and Jones. And I think the world of Overton and Q, but that's tough. That's a tough matchup. I think Kane Womack is going to have to generate pressure in this game. Rushing the front four is just not going to work with those LSU tackles. He's going to have to confuse Garrett Nussmeier, and I think blitzing that interior, that A gap with the left guard out, the center's a redshirt freshman. I think if Kane Womack's got it in his bag, the double A gap blitzes, blitzes from Lawson and Jahad Campbell up the middle, or even safety blitz, blitzes from the far outside, force those tackles to be in conflict of who to pick up because you're blitzing somebody from the outside. You're just not going to generate the pressure you need in this game with just rushing four guys when two of them are being blocked by Campbell and Jones. So I see as a key matchup Kane Womack versus Garrett Nussmeier, and being a little creative, because you can't just let Garrett Nussmeier sit back there and throw the ball not pressured 50 times. He's going to do what Blake was talking about. He's not going to miss those open receivers that Alabama was fortunate that Nico missed.
No, I agree completely. And I think it has to happen, but you also have to be cognizant of, I think Mason Taylor is such a big weapon. While maybe Devontae Smith is matched up on him in an ideal situation, there's going to be times where Jahad Campbell and Deontay Lawson are probably having to cover him as well. So that could be something that could prove to be an issue if you blitz too much. But I agree. I think it has to happen to try to get him uncomfortable and get him off his mark a little bit, and maybe force him into some of those bad throws. And I'm glad that we kept the key matchups. We keep it Jalen Milroe light, because that's going to be the topic of this penultimate discussion for us. And we're going to do a little over under, an old Travis Reier special here. I sent it to you guys ahead of time to give you a heads up, but talking about Jalen Milroe's rushing yards, because that's been a topic here really over the last few weeks. I'm setting it at 75. So turning it over to you, Blake, first. How do you feel about that from an over-under standpoint, 75?
I'm going under, but not by a lot. Like I think 75 is a high number for a quarterback. And we even
let me preface this. I should have said this first. He's done it 3 times this season: Western Kentucky, South Florida, and Georgia. Last year against LSU, he had 155, 4 touchdowns. Yeah. And then last week, Marcel Reed had a big game. That's why it's the discussion. Yes. It's happened 3 out of 8 times. The 75, you're right. It's a big number.
I think it's a fair number. I think I'm going under, but slightly. We've talked a lot about that Marcel Reed Texas A&M game kind of over the course of the week, and he ran all over him, but he only had 62 yards. So I don't think Jalen Milroe has to run for 100, 120 to be effective on the ground. I think if he can be effective in the red zone, if he can be effective on just design zone reads that get him 7-8 yards, I think that's going to be enough to put enough pressure on this LSU defense to where that's a successful day. I'm not picking him to go over 75. I think he'll be in the 60 to 65 range, because I also think you're going to incorporate these running backs a good bit. And I think Justice Haynes and Jam Miller can also have good games that kind of complement Jalen Milroe's run game. So if you have all 3 of those guys that are around, if you can get all of them around 50 to 60 each, I think that's an acceptable number, a number that's going to get you a good offensive performance from Alabama. So I think he's capable of going for 100, 120. He went for 150 last year. I think as far as 75, I'm going to go a little lower, because I think he could still have – if he had 12, 13 carries for 65, 67 yards and 3 touchdowns, like that, he torched them on the ground. He did what he needed to do, and I'm sure that opened up a lot for the rest of Alabama's offense. So I'm going to go under, but slightly.
Yeah, maybe the yardage total isn't as good of an indicator. I do think it's kind of topical, like I said, with what's happened over the last few games. But you're right. If you look at the touchdown numbers and he's over 2 in this one, it could mean a big day for the offense and for the ground game. But what about it, Jimmy? How do you feel about that number from an over-under standpoint?
Yeah, 2 things. I'm going to go under also for 2 reasons. Number one, I think you're also obviously, the way college football counts rushing totals. I think Jalen's probably going to rush for maybe 75 yards or more on QB design runs and scrambles, but he's also going to get docked maybe 25 yards from 3 sacks. So I think with the sack totals baked in, I would go under for that reason and a bigger reason. Number two, because of what Charlie stated to start the segment, Jalen's had tremendous success running the ball. He had 150 yards against LSU on the ground last year. They're coming off a game where everyone is blaming the Marcel Reed rushing plays as to why LSU lost that game. I think it also had to do with Nussmeier's 3 interceptions. But I think LSU is going to overcorrect. I think this is a situation where in defensive staff meetings, it starts off with Coach Baker saying, hey, guys, we might lose and play bad Saturday, but it won't be because Milroe's going to rush for 150 yards. We're gonna die some other way, but we're not dying that way. And I think LSU is going to overcorrect and commit a lot to preventing that from happening. And that's why I think it's set up really nicely for Milroe to have a huge day with his arm. And that's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all good points. I think, though, the trends are there, whether it was last year. And I know, look, we've talked about it. Jimmy, you've talked about it. LSU's defense was bad last year. It was just better than Vanderbilt bad. And that's not somewhere you want to be in most of those statistical areas. But he did it last year. 2 weeks ago, they gave up, not 75 yards, but multiple rushing touchdowns to a mobile quarterback. And I think what you saw against Georgia with 117 earlier this season, coming out of a bye week, it just feels similar. And so I think the trends are there I'm going to go over. I'm going to break the mold and go over. I think Jalen has a big day on the ground. I think, LSU has to know it's coming, but until you can prove you can stop it, why would you not go at it? And so I think we'll see plenty of design runs early. I think we'll see them probably often, but I think both Jalen Milroe and these running backs could have a big day on the ground because, like I said, they're not great at defending the run. So I think, and that leads me to our final topic here. Alabama wins this game and I think if Jalen Milroe goes over 75 yards on the ground, they win this game. I think if he does what he did last year, then Alabama's going to be successful. And it could be a situation where he has some success early. They make adjustments. And then, like you said, Jimmy, they kind of sell out on stopping it. They make Alabama beat them through the air. I think he can be capable of that as well. The big plays are there in the passing game for Alabama. So, LSU is always going to have dudes in the secondary. But if Jalen Milroe can have success on the ground early, I think that opens things up for the rest of this offense. And if Alabama wins this game, it's because Jalen kind of gets out of this funk he's been in of late. So what about you guys? Alabama wins this game if what, Blake?
If they win the turnover battle. I think it's really important whenever you're going on the road, especially playing in an atmosphere like Death Valley. You've got to have an edge statistically in that category if you're playing an evenly matched team in a tough road environment. And I think, like we already talked about, like Garrett Nussmeier, like there are interceptions to be had. There are going to be chances for this defense to make plays. And if they do, I think that sets them up really well, especially if they come early. Like if you can get a turnover, let's say Alabama takes it, scores 7-0, and then they get a turnover on the next possession, and you have a chance to extend your lead even more. Like if you can get out to a quick start by forcing turnovers, it takes the crowd out of it. It makes everything easy for you for the rest of the game. So if they win the turnover battle, I think they've got a great shot, especially if it's by more than one turnover. But I say winning the turnover battle is incredibly important in this matchup.
What about you, Jimmy? Alabama wins this game if...
Yeah, I like both of y'all's answer a lot. I'll be maybe more elementary, or maybe this is too obvious, but last year in this game, the quarterback matchup, I really feel like Jalen Milroe launched himself into, I wouldn't say the Heisman race because he was never really a threat to even go to New York last year, but Jalen Milroe, in my mind, finished 6th in the Heisman voting in part because of a campaign that was launched against LSU. I felt he either outperformed or played with the Heisman Trophy winner, Jaden Daniels, last year. And I think voters who watched that game were like, yeah, Jaden Daniels, that was a Heisman-worthy performance, but this Alabama kid is really good too. And Milroe ends up finishing 6th, I think largely in part to his performance that night, which was his best performance of the year last season. I think Alabama wins this game if the story Sunday morning is Jalen Milroe and not Garrett Nussmeier. Now, Nussmeier's not Jaden, but he's extremely capable. Jim Nagy, I have a world of confidence in Nagy's evaluating. He's the head of the Senior Bowl. He thinks Nussmeier might be the first quarterback taken in this draft. And I'm never going to disagree with Jim Nagy about stuff like that. Nussmeier's great, but much like last year, I think Jalen Milroe is more than capable of stealing this quarterback thunder, and Milroe's the big story. And I'm not saying the launch is back into Heisman contention, but if the talk Sunday morning is how great Jalen Milroe is and not Garrett Nussmeier, then Alabama won the game.
No doubt. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. That's what I felt too. It's a big game for Jalen. It's a big game for Alabama. Win this one, your playoff hopes stay alive. Lose, and they're all but over. So it's going to be a big one down in Baton Rouge, 6:30 kick on ABC. Hopefully it's not too rainy. Haven't really looked at the latest weather updates, but it looks like it's not going to be too bad. Blake and I will be heading down on Saturday after some Bama basketball Friday night against Arkansas State. So stay tuned for that, everyone. And we'll have plenty of coverage the rest of the week. We got plenty more coming from an LSU Alabama preview standpoint. But if you guys have stuck around this long, be sure to like and subscribe, hit that notification bell. If you're listening via podcast, we appreciate 5 stars, and look forward to a very interesting game this weekend down on the Bayou. But until then, we'll see you guys on the next show.